This last weekend, we kicked off a new series on the prodigal son. It's one story. We're going to spend 3 weeks on it. Charles Dickens would agree. He said it's the greatest short story ever told. So it bears a little bit of attention. But in the context, there's actually 3 stories right in a row about lost things: a lost sheep, a lost coin, and in this story, about a lost son. Or to be more specific, 2 lost sons. But what a lot of people don't realize is there's actually 2 parables after these 3 parables, so it winds up being 5 in a row. And we're going to talk about not only the parable of the prodigal son, but I want to give you a little bit of training of how you, right there in your group, could learn how to read all parables with a little bit more precision and how to draw more out of it. So it's going to be some coaching on Bible interpretation as well as digging into the text. So let's start with this question, the question that I think we've all thought about a little bit. Why do you think stories are so powerful for shaping our lives? Jesus said that hearing something can actually make you deaf to it. And it wasn't just Jesus. That was Matthew 13. The gospel writer of John said the same thing in John 12. The apostle Paul said the same thing in Acts 28. 3 different times in the New Testament, this passage that Jesus quoted, Isaiah 6, are quoted by others to remind us that hearing can actually make you go deaf. In the original context, Isaiah, he sees this vision from God. It's a vision of the throne room of God. It was terrifying. The doorposts of the temple shook. And there were these seraphim, the technical name is the flaming angels flying around with 6 wings, and they're crying out, holy, holy, holy. Isaiah is undone. In the middle of that vision, he hears God ask, who will go for us? And Isaiah raises his hand and says, here am I, Lord, send me. He was sent to preach to his hometown in Jerusalem. And what was his message? Because you have not repented, and that's important, because you have not repented, you will be hearing, but never hear. You will be seeing, but never see. One of the ways that God hardens people's hearts is by preaching more of a message that they've already ignored. Now listen, let's be clear. God is not making people blind because he's just mean. He is allowing those who have already rejected the message to be deaf through the message they keep hearing. So in the circle right now, share a time when hearing something made you deaf to it. Could be a train, a plane, a cry of a child. But here's the most important part. Answer this question. What are the spiritual implications of going deaf after hearing but not listening? When we talk about parables, I want to make sure we're on the same page. So here is a clear definition of what a parable is: an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. More specific, the Greek word parabole is para, from which we get like parallel or paraplegic. It means alongside of. Bale is the Greek word to throw. So you've got this spiritual truth, and Jesus kind of throws a story alongside it. So through the story, you're able to better see the spiritual truth. And what he does is he uses real life elements like seed, a field, a father, a banquet. But each of the elements, they're so common that literally a person standing in front of Jesus could listen to every parable and point. There's a woman over there kneading yeast into a lump of dough for bread. And there's a farmer over there throwing his seed. And there's a sheep over there who got lost. Right around their own hometown, every element of these parables is right there to see, hear, and touch. That's why they're so relatable. And as you look at the parables of Jesus, there's some standard interpretations. A father is going to mean God in Jesus' parables, as well as the rabbinic parables. A field equals the world. Messengers equal angels. A dinner equals heaven or your eternal reward. So interpreting the parables would not be hard if you truly listened spiritually. Now, one other thing about parables that's really unique is that they typically have 1, 2, or 3 main characters. This is important. You don't have to interpret every detail of a parable. So the Good Samaritan, for example, you don't have to interpret what the donkey means. You don't have to interpret what the wine means. You don't have to interpret what the hotel means. Here's what you do need to interpret. Every major player, so if there's two characters in the parable, it has two main points of interpretation. If there's three main characters, there's 3 points of interpretation. And the parable we're looking at here, the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son, or maybe even the prodigal father. Prodigal, after all, means lavish, and the father was lavish in his love. So whatever you call this parable, there are 3 players: a father, a younger son, and an older son. So here's the question. In the parable of the prodigal son, what's the main lesson you learn from each character? Younger son, the father, the older brother. Discuss that, and when we come back, we're going to look at one other interpretive element of this parable. One of the unique things about parables, and I find it actually fascinating, is they have what you might call an end stress. At the end of the parable, there's this aha moment. When I was a kid, my brother used to pull his fist up his sleeve and say, guess what I have in my sleeve? You guess what I have in my sleeve? You want to look up my sleeve? And I'm curious as a little kid, a little gullible, and he'd go, pooh, and pop me in the nose. It wasn't very nice. And Jesus does pretty much the exact same thing with a parable. He goes, hey, you want to hear a story? I'll tell you a story. And we just get drawn into the story. And at the very end, it's like, boom, it hits you right in the face. So one of the differences between the rabbinic parables and Jesus' parables is the rabbis only told stories that reinforced their standard cultural wisdom. So it's kind of like when we tell nursery rhymes or read a bedtime story. The Three Little Pigs. What's the point? It's better to work hard than to work fast. Things like a tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race. Jesus' parables are different. They don't reinforce standard wisdom. They upend it. And virtually all of his parables, if you really listen, at the end of it, you wouldn't say, wow, that was interesting. You would go, whoa, that changes everything. And it's never more true than in this parable of the prodigal son. The father acts in ways. We've talked about this in the weekend message. There will be more to come next week. But the father acts in ways that we would consider undignified of a father. Now, you're smart people. I want you to go through this parable and ask this question: what elements in the parable of the prodigal son would be counter-cultural? One last observation about parables. They often come in a series. Like once Jesus starts telling a story, spinning a yarn, he just can't help himself. The longest series is actually Matthew 13, where he tells 9 parables in a row. Near as I can tell, that was his whole sermon that day, just story after story. He said, you guys want to hear a story? Yeah, we want to hear a story. So he tells the story and says, did you understand the story? And they go, no. You want to hear another story? Yeah, I want to hear another. 9 in a row. The next longest series is Luke 15 and 16. There are 5 parables in the row. It begins in Luke 15 with the parable of the sheep, the coin, and the son. And the main point of each of those is the joy we have when we find something that's lost. So let's apply this to our own lives. In your own circle right now, I want you to talk about this question. Who would you rejoice over if they came to Christ? And what are you doing to help them find their way home?